Welcome to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Welcome back to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast. Michael is back on the podcast this week. Hello, Michael.
Hey, Meg.
It's been a fairly busy week, and I think let's just kick off because actually we're going to start with financials because I guess the US firms are starting to report. We won't discuss some particular firms as some of them are clients, but we've seen some reports this morning of actually really positive financial results for some of these US firms. And let's start with kind of the elephant in the room. The Freshfields stories that came out this week around their LLP accounts. If anyone's missed it, I'm just going to recap very quickly. So obviously, Freshfields has stopped officially reporting its financial results to the press or externally with a press release. And obviously, because they're an LLP firm, they still have to report their LLP accounts every year. So, according to the latest accounts, it seems that the firm saw a decline in its profit available for distribution to partners in the last financial year after some regulatory changes. And this is really what led the coverage across all the legal trades in regards to their financials. It's a bit unfortunate because obviously there was a kind of a change in kind of accounting rules, which has affected the firm, and I'm sure it's affecting other firms. But I think the fact that they don't really have a say anymore and control over their own kind of financials and how they're reported, it just didn't help, did it?
Yeah, I think that would be a bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
I can't really understand why, we not really in the business of criticizing firms unnecessarily, but I've been baffled by this decision by Freshfields ever since they did it, because you're achieving three things, and none of them, to my mind, are positive. Firstly, and most importantly, you are relinquishing a significant amount of control over the messaging around your financial performance, and you're leaving it to chance rather than shaping it. I cannot see for any business how that can be a good thing. There are any business that has to report its financials. If you don't have to report your financials at all anywhere, it is a different equation. But if you have a statutory obligation to report your financial performance, as LLPs do, then you're not staying quiet about it. You're just relinquishing control over the messaging around it as a policy decision, which to me I cannot see any upside whatsoever to doing that. Secondly, you're also damaging your relationships with the legal press, because you're taking away a key piece of information they report on. That, again, I cannot see any upside to doing that whatsoever, because there are times when you need the legal press to be on your side. There are times when you need to have the legal press on your side when something bad happens, or when you're going through, say, leadership change, things like that. You want to be able to control messaging. This is a key piece of information, a key landmark thing, which you're basically not giving to them anymore. So you have a lack of control. You have damaging relationships with key trade press journalists who, whether you want them to be important or not, are important at times in terms of how you are perceived in the market, your reputation. That flows through to lateral hiring, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, you also have the fact that the financial data is really out of date, in that it's coming out at a time which is in sync with the US firms that Freshfields seeks to very much emulate and be part of. And let's face it, they had a really good, the numbers tell a really good story about their success in the US in terms of growth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers are coming out at the same time as US firms start to announce their global figures, but it's 10 months old and with unmanaged messaging, which seems to kind of be a double own goal, really, because it it's coming out in an unmanaged way right at the time that the firms that Freshfields now sees itself as competing with, and genuinely does to a significant extent, are putting out in a managed and proactive and very bullish way their numbers, which are not necessarily, apart from this accounting technicality thing, not firms have had good years by the looks of things. We've seen some very good numbers coming out of some of the top US firms today, and they're promoting those good numbers aggressively, but they're not. When you take out the accounting impact, they're not. The revenue growth figures are not hugely different from Freshfields, etc. But Freshfields has taken through the net effect of not managing the messaging and not managing the process is that although they had some good coverage of the US growth, they have traded quite a lot of it away for coverage of an accounting technicality, which probably could have been completely managed. Wouldn't have even been an issue if they'd have announced it at previous times. They wouldn't have had to necessarily disclose that. It's only coming through in the LLP accounts, really. And so it doesn't seem to make sense to me to trade away what could have been pretty much wall-to-wall positive coverage of a US growth story for slightly angry tone coverage where you've incentivized your key legal press reporters and editors to overlook that somewhat and focus on the negative. So sorry, hopefully that's not a rant, but I just don't see any upside in doing it this way whatsoever.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I'm sure these points have been made to the leadership team there, and it would be interesting to see, actually, in a year where potentially, for whatever reason, the figures might not be as good on the LLP accounts. If they start getting more negative coverage, I think there might be a shift towards moving back to properly announcing things. So we'll see. I'd be keen to see what the reaction was to the coverage this week. I can't see how anyone would have been really happy with it, because I guess that the success of the US was completely overshadowed by the actual drop in profits to partners.
Well, the FT coverage is fine. You could say, oh, we only care about the FT, but again, it's an unmanaged situation and process, relatively speaking, unless something happened behind the scenes. But there is an argument for saying we're just going to orientate all our financial reporting around the LLP accounts, but you would still want to make it easier for people by putting out a press release and organizing some interviews around that. I don't have an issue with saying we don't want to have two reporting cycles. We want to have one, and we're going to do the LLP accounts. We appreciate the information is a bit out of date, but we just want to simplify things and do it this way. That's okay. That's reasonable. But that doesn't appear to be what's happened. So obviously I'm not in the room. Maybe there were some briefings done, and in which case that would have, but that hasn't been apparent anyway. So who knows? It's an interesting one, but you can always tell herd mentalities exist in the legal sector for a reason. There's lots, even a behemoth like Freshfields, there's lots of other big beasts, right? There are many other firms that are, as big as them, and certainly nobody else seems to have followed. And if nobody follows, that tells you something.
For sure, for sure. But despite this, I guess the other firms that are starting to report now are showing some good practice in terms of reporting financials, and some diversity as well as to how they choose to report it and who they go to. So it's positive.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think that's an important point that you make there, Meg, in terms of seeing US firms becoming more sophisticated in their approach to their financial reporting, professionalizing their approach, and not just relying on the law.com survey, which has obviously played a very important part in driving disclosure of law firm financials, US law firm financials, in the absence of any formal reporting obligations in that jurisdiction. And I think it's healthy to see firms taking control of a process, sending it out, sending their financials out under embargo to, or going to Bloomberg, not just law.com. I think these are multi-billion-dollar entities, organizations, businesses, and professionalizing the approach to financial reporting in line with the size and scale of the business, I think, is something which I would have expected to see a long time ago. I mean, obviously, I've run or been a part of financial reporting at large firms many times in the past, and there was a time a number of years ago where I think A&O, well, A&O Shearman A&O was, really put out some very professional, almost like corporatized approach to financial reporting about 10 years ago. And I was at Baker's at the time, and we were really impressed with it, and we kind of copied it. Really, it was like this is the way things are going, and then it proved not really to be the way things were going, and if anything, there was a sort of step backwards in the market in terms of approach to financial reporting. But I think owning your messages, having clarity of process, doing it at the same time every year, having a professional approach to what you disclose, what you don't disclose, in line with being a multi-billion-dollar a year business makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think it's kind of positive, and I think this will be quite a hopefully a decent year for most firms. So yeah, I'm sure we'll see a bunch of decent coverage in the next few weeks. Moving on to again, today is going to be very US focused, and I guess that's not really our fault. It's mostly what's going on over there. So obviously Trump has been, since day one, trying to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, some other South American nations, and he's looking at the EU as well. I think the UK so far is not being talked about that much, but again, you never know. So this is a bit chaotic because as he announced some of these tariffs, I think some of them have not been implemented. Some nations have managed to kind of dodge them and negotiate. So it's very volatile, I think, for everyone. It's very unpredictable as well because some of these tariffs won't actually see the light of day. Some of them will be imposed on particular services or goods and vice versa. So it's a difficult time, I think, for businesses to plan for any of this, and I think for advisors as well, to provide the right advice. I don't know what you think about this, Michael.
I think that it's not a surprise that we've got volatility and chaos descending immediately when Trump came back. And I think it must be very difficult for law firms to be able to effectively serve their clients on issues like tariffs in such a volatile environment where something is being announced, countermeasures are being announced literally over the weekend, and then things get delayed. You don't know what's real and you don't know what's not real at the moment. And I think it's particularly in the international trade arena where this is immediately starting to play out, where obviously tariffs have a significant impact on companies, some sectors more than others. Automobiles, for example, being very much in the sort of firing line. Complex supply chains, international businesses, really important as a source of jobs. Political footballs quite often around car manufacturing. And they will be turning to their advisors and wanting help. And it's quite hard to strategically advise a client when there is this level of volatility. And it's probably going to be like this to varying extents for some time. Unless things settle down a bit and miss the tariffs or whatever. Do they genuinely impact the economy to the extent that people think? Perhaps not. I mean, markets seem to be relatively relaxed about tariffs. except for when they come completely out of the blue on a large scale. But what we saw was dialed back really quickly. But I think it's evident you've seen law firms putting out briefing notes, and then those briefing notes are out of date just a few hours later, or irrelevant or redundant. So finding a way to advise clients in the Trump era on certain things is going to be, and tariffs would be one of them, is going to be kind of interesting, I think. So I don't know what the answers are there, but it'll be interesting to see where we go in terms of which tariffs actually settle into things that are actually genuinely applied and which ones turn out to have been purely negotiating tactics, never fully real.
Yeah, completely. I think it's a very tricky line to walk for a lot of people, I think. So, yeah, let's see what comes next. I'm sure it's going to be more chaos. But still related to the Trump administration, I mean, everyone will have seen the amount of executive orders, some of which actually have to do with D&I. And multiple government agencies in the US have kind of got rid of their kind of D&I departments and staff, and it's a very difficult time, I think, for US companies to stay in line with their own values, but also what the legal changes are that are pushed by governments. And I think, again, law firms are going to be really busy in terms of advising their clients as to the law, which is great for the employment teams, but equally for their own sake. I guess a lot of firms in the US have made amazing strands in positive strands in terms of being more accessible and diverse and inclusive. And a lot of them have got dedicated staff members looking at D&I policies globally. And there, to me, there is a bit of a question mark as to how this government push is going to affect those teams and what the firms are doing in terms of D&I and access to the industry.
Yeah, look, I think that there isn't sort of legal sector specific coverage about this right now, but I think it's inevitable that there will be, given how much of a focus there has been in promoting and evolving DEI policies in the legal sector over the past decade or so, whether that's across race, gender, social mobility, sexual orientation. And this is hard, right? Because there are many people, there are people who are at the sort of extreme on each end of the debate. And there are also some people in the middle who may think that some policies went too far in society and life in generally or whatever, who are not extremists. They might not be right, but they're not extremists either. And there are also difficulties in the legal sector in the legal sector, it's hard enough navigating for international firms in particular, navigating as a global firm different cultural norms, different cultural sensitivities, while having an approach to the basic fundamental principles of treating people decently and fairly, and applying them across the business. When you throw into the mix this political rhetoric being combined with actual real and potential legal changes, that becomes all the harder. And that will become, I think it's starting in the US. My co-MD, Ben, is in the US at the moment, having a lot of meetings with US firms. And I asked him to ask this question to everybody he meets. And I think he's going to come back with some interesting views about how firms are adjusting or not adjusting any of their policies or what they're thinking at the moment. Because on the one hand, nobody has to bow to political rhetoric. On the other hand, when you have changes to law made, well, everybody has to comply with the law, and law firms very much have to comply with the law. And if certain things relating to DEI policies are banned, that's how do you navigate that? You can't break the law. I assume that any material challenges will be opposed and things will play through courts, etc., etc. However, it is a very different it's a very different tone from the top, and it's runs completely counter to the direction of travel on having quite sophisticated and introducing new aspects of DEI policies in the legal sector that we've seen and become accustomed to over the last 10 to 15 years. And that is, as I said, it's amplified by the fact that there may be actual legal changes that sit behind or flow from this new political rhetoric, which firms will have to take into account and, if it becomes settled law, comply with. So it's happening in the US at the moment. How that flows out to international firms, how that change in tone impacts their approach to DEI, if it does at all, remains to be seen. But it will absolutely be a boardroom topic for all big firms, all big US and international firms with a big US presence, because how could it not be? It's something that firms have gone hard on as part of their approach to people, and any kind of aspects of rolling that back will be difficult. And I would not like to be having to work through these things and also thinking about how do you communicate change or how do you communicate things to your people effectively. That communication, if there are adjustments or changes, and you see just today, Google scrapped their diversity hiring goals and cites Trump's DEI orders. That, Trump DOJ instructed to criminally investigate companies over DEI. But this has hard law elements to it. This is going to be hard to navigate right now. This is going to be difficult, and the fact that it goes beyond political rhetoric into actually legal action, and some law firms' big clients, as scrapping certain policies, etc., is going to pose all sorts of questions and conundrums, and how the decisions are taken and how those decisions, if are communicated, is going to be absolutely key. And some firms are going to get it wrong. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I think it's hard to get it right in a situation like this where a lot of these firms will be very diverse, wherever they are. And, if there's any change of any kind, you can't please everyone. And I think a lot of people, it will be quite shocking for a lot of people, whatever the changes are, even if they're minor. I think that will be a very difficult thing to communicate in any case. Especially in the year of 2025, when firms have for a long time kind of pushed on this, and the legal sector to some aspect has been quite ahead of some other ones around D&I. It's not perfect by any means, but it has made quite a lot of progress in recent years. So I think it's going to be a very difficult thing to manage, as you say. And it's interesting because some of the financial institutions in the US have said they would not budge on this at all. I think one of them was JP Morgan. I can't remember the other one. And some other organizations are kind of, going head to head with the US government on this. So it will be interesting to see what everyone does per sector. I mean, it's pretty clear that the tech sector doesn't really care and wants to be in line with government, but I guess they have a personal and financial incentive to be in line with government. But clearly some other sectors and some other companies are not in line and do not want to be in line. And it's interesting to see how it's playing out in the public view.
Yeah, I think it is. It will be. If this is a people business, right? Professional services applies just as much to what we do as it does to law firms. As somebody said to me recently, all we have are people, and so communicating changes to people policies is difficult and challenging, especially especially where in areas which are on something that's going to be so divisive. So,
And to clients too, right? Because
absolutely.
some clients are requiring panels that are more diverse and stuff, and I think this all will play out quite, in a difficult way, messaging that internally, and I guess
Yeah,
with clients and potentially externally with the press.
And I suspect you're going to see far fewer panel requirements mandating diversity.
Yeah.
Certainly from big US companies, you're already seeing it you're already seeing if they're scrapping their own policies, they are certainly not going to impose policies on suppliers, whether they are vendors of tech, whether they are vendors of legal services, whether they are vendors of accountancy services, or whether they're suppliers of PR services. You may see some remain, but it's if they are scrapping their own policies, they're not going to apply policies to other people.
Completely. On that note,
happy note. What a happy. Why haven't we had a joyous podcast today?
I know. Sorry for being all doom and gloom today. Hopefully next week will be a bit different, but let's see what comes out. But yeah, on that note, it's the end of the podcast. Michael, thank you for joining me this week. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Meg.
And we'll be back next week for another episode. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to find us. Thank you a lot. Bye.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.